Our last session was on ADA compliance, a little ADA update, and we had some great conversation, great examples, right? The ADA is challenging because while it is very specific in many ways, we have a lot of decisions to make, a lot of choices, right? I talked a lot about we make decisions if this happens, then that. And sometimes the then part could be three different types of issues or approaches. And so especially today we'll be talking about paratransit eligibility determination, right? So you would think that the ADA, and it is, very specific on eligibility, yet we have so many choices. How we complete eligibility is really left up into each agency's hands for the most part, right? We have some guidelines that we follow, but, and that's what can make it challenging. I think if the ADA were more specific, and if it told us exactly how to do everything, I think that would make services a lot easier, but it doesn't do that. And that includes eligibility as well. So, you know, we always look to better understand the eligibility process, of course. There are different methodologies, right? We're going to talk about a paper approach, right? Application. Do we have a professional verification, a doctor's note to go along with that? Do we do a telephone interview? Do we do an in-person evaluation, right? We have choices to do all of those things or some of those things if we want. And so, and how do we become an eligibility determination professional? That's really difficult as well. We need to understand what this process is. And I think this process scares a lot of agencies and a lot of staff away because we're worried about making the wrong mistake. We're worried about denying services to someone. And these are people with disabilities, and we don't want that on our hands. And so I've worked with so many agencies that have a 0% denial rate, literally approving everyone. They don't even want to touch denying an applicant. And that's a choice. That's a choice. The process we have determines the outcomes, right? If this, then that. And so if we already inherently sort of have hesitation or we're not sure, I mean, I've worked with a lot of agencies where their eligibility staff were really like, they were the secretary last week and they got promoted and now they're the ADA coordinator. And they've really never worked in transit before and now they are making eligibility determination. And they're terrified. They're terrified they're going to make a mistake and so they approve everyone. And that's really not what the ADA at least directs us to do. We have the opportunity to do more and to be more specific. So very important that we understand that. I'd like to learn a little bit about all of you. Raise your hand if you directly work in eligibility determination. One of you. Do you manage staff that handles eligibility? Raise your hand. A couple more. What about the other 75% of you? How is your world impacted by the eligibility process? Like what brought you here today? I know you didn't raise your hands. What is your role with your agency?
I am a secretary.
Okay.
In our transit department.
Okay. So maybe there's just a general interest in this topic from the rest of you and you're interested to understand what it is. Okay, that's really helpful because it helps me understand who is here and maybe what level of detail I provide. Yes?
Well, with my agency, my whole deal is I need to start training drivers to understand what they have to do and how they have to treat the customer. So that's why I'm here.
Yes. Thank you. Well, that's a very important element of driver training. I think what often does not happen is it's not described in great detail what ADA paratransit is, what role it plays in public transportation. And so we can end up having drivers that they just sort of know what we've taught them, but they don't understand at its core why we have the services that we have. I mean, I've been in safety meetings with bus drivers, a room full, 200 bus drivers, and they're all yelling saying, why don't we have a separate service for people with disabilities? All they do is slow our bus down, right? Those aren't great messages to hear. I give that example because I think they have a fundamental misunderstanding of public transportation. That public transportation is for everyone, right? This is the service that is supposed to be created for everyone, our fixed route transportation. And then we have a certain population of our riders that, because of their disability, they cannot ride the bus, either sometimes or for all of their trips. And that's where the world of paratransit comes in, right? It's not that paratransit is for people with disabilities. It's not. Paratransit is not for people with disabilities. That's too simplified. Paratransit is for people with disabilities who are unable to use fixed route services. So I want to share with you right now, not it is difficult for them to ride the bus, right? It's okay if something is difficult for a person with a disability. We do have to have a reasonable standard. At what point does the difficulty to ride the bus become unreasonable or unsafe? But along the spectrum, right, a large percentage of people with disabilities might be challenged, might experience challenges riding the bus. That doesn't mean they qualify for paratransit or qualify unconditionally, right? That's very important as well. So even for some of you out there that maybe you have a 0% denial rate, or maybe you're not going to change that, but maybe what you will change after we talk a little bit today is maybe not so many of them will be unconditional. Maybe you'll start to collect better information, more information. That's really what I want to talk to you about, the process of eligibility, right? How do we do this well? How do we collect information? I don't know why this keeps happening. I apologize. Why are we completing this process, right? So a little bit about myself. I've worked in public transit 24 years now. Started my career, or I worked in public transit for 24 years. Started in paratransit with an agency called Access Services in Los Angeles. My last public agency job was with Los Angeles Metro as the ADA compliance manager there. So living and breathing ADA compliance in a really large urban environment was an amazing experience. Just issues all day, every day. And so I'm really happy to be able to share those experiences with all of you. And I've worked, I was a transit manager for a small city outside of Phoenix, city of Avondale. So I understand having 9 vehicles in a growing community with little to no budget and meeting the needs of our residents. I know what that feels like. And so along with my larger agency experience, I think helps provide sort of a well-rounded understanding of the challenges that we have, and I think that helps me also provide some guidance and direction to all of you in various ways as well. So please ask questions at any time, raise your hand, blurt it out, whatever works for you. Please do share your experiences or challenges that you're having. And if you've heard something different than somewhere else, let's talk about that as well, right? Everything is about interpretation. We look at the guidance and we interpret it the best we can. And we try to keep in mind compliance with the regulation, safety, right? The needs of our riders, and that public transit is a civil right for all of us. And so that's why we take very seriously any potential incidents of denying services to a person with a disability. So specific to paratransit eligibility, of course, the ultimate denial is denying them from using the service at all, right? Let alone a single trip. So that's very important for us to understand. We do have really 2 different types of services in public transit: fixed route, and then we have everything else, which falls under demand responsive services. ADA paratransit is demand responsive. It requires a trip to be initiated. Even if they're on subscription service, at some point that trip had been initiated, even though it shows up every day at the same time, right? So paratransit, these services are forever connected, right? Paratransit was created to reflect, if you will, in many ways, fixed route bus services, and that's why we have those equivalency requirements. Very important that we understand that. Let's see. So we want to make sure, the ADA gives us guidance on the process. Okay, number 1, the guidance tells us that we must establish a process for determining ADA paratransit eligibility. So we have no choice. We have to have a process. That's really, to the large extent, the guidance that's provided. It doesn't exactly comment on what that process has to be. And that's why we have many agencies that are just a paper process, maybe with professional verification, and more increasingly as communities grow, starting to move towards an in-person process. Yes?
How many agencies do you know of that use the fax system?
The fax assessment? I don't know of agencies that use the fax assessment directly, but there are many, many elements of that process that agencies are using that is ingrained into the in-person eligibility process. So it might be difficult to look at well, first of all, if a contractor is providing in-person eligibility on behalf of an agency, they're probably not going to share what their process is because they're a private contractor and they like to think that what they have is special and private. So, but I think in the in-person area approach to eligibility, I think we find a lot of fax elements in eligibility. So there's a tool, 20, 30 years old now, fax assessment, which identifies and walks someone through a process of understanding their ability to retain information. It includes a retraining process. Can you identify bus number 17 for me? And if they can't do it, we sort of walk through a retraining. So it really identifies a lot of cognitive as well as physical elements in determining a person's ability to use fixed route services. We don't have enough time to go through that process today, but I actually do use that and review that process during my full paratransit eligibility webinar. So there is another session of that coming up in October. That's like a 3.5 hour training. So, but great question, definitely. And then the guidance from the ADA tells us that we shall, look at the language, we shall strictly limit ADA paratransit service to eligible individuals. So we need to have a process that is formalized, that is, how would you define strictly, right? We shall strictly limit. That's sort of telling us that we should make sure that only those people that qualify use this service. And so that's why I'm not going to tell you if your agency has 0 denials that you are not complying with the ADA. I would say that 0 denials is not a strict process, but that's my opinion. That's an interpretation, right? Is it possible that you have a strict process and still yet everyone qualify? Yeah, I guess that is possible, right? So we need to really make sure that we understand that we have this process, that we have a strict process to determine eligibility, and that we do have some responsibility to make sure that only those people that qualify use and have access to the service. And if we just talk about sort of an operational perspective of paratransit is very expensive. It's very difficult to operate, right? The operational challenges that are experienced, let alone given that every rider is a person with a disability. And so we need to make sure that we understand all of those things and that we design our services purposefully. In our last session, we had lots of examples of agencies providing accommodation after accommodation for their riders. And when there is opportunity in the ADA to maybe have a more limited operational approach, the agencies are not. They're giving as much as the riders are willing to take. And it catches up. I think 1 or 2 agencies in particular last session really started to see like, yeah, I don't think we can continue to operate the way we've been operating. And so it's really difficult, even with the eligibility determination process. We're always trying to balance following our policies, our procedures, the ADA, that we have a strict process, with also remembering that we also want to help people. We want to help people with disabilities. How does denying them use of my paratransit services, how is that helpful? So eligibility staff that are very sensitive really struggle with this process because they don't want to deny, right? And so that's where there can be a conflict where we have a strict process yet, but I'm here to help people. And if I deny them, how is that helping them? So now we need to find a way to sort of depersonalize this process, right? And that can be very, very difficult for a lot of people. So we almost always start with an application, right? We know the regulations tell us that we have 21 days to provide determination regarding their application for service. And if they don't have a response by 21 days, then they get to use services, right? But my question to all of you is, well, when does that 21 days begin? Right? Do you have in your process a policy that clearly defines when your 21-day process begins? Some agencies will say the process begins upon receipt of a completed application. Well, now we need to define what completed application means, right? If you have an application, a paper application, and say they're missing their address, or if they don't submit the professional verification, technically we could say that this is an incomplete application. We send it back to them to complete, right? So we have these tools, if you will. So the 21 days, it can be difficult for some agencies to make a determination in 21 days. So we need to make sure that when that 21 days is very clearly defined for our users, right? I think those individuals that really struggle with the eligibility process see the process as a medical determination. Like they have to somehow, it has to be proven that this person has a disability. And that's not what this process is at all. And this is often what scares staff away, right? It scares them to a zero denial rate because they are not medical professionals. And if they believe that this is a medical process, they don't want any part of it, right? So approve everyone. And it's not. Eligibility is a transportation decision, right? One of the types of guidance that I like to provide, like what even comes down to what we call our staff. I like to call staff that are responsible for eligibility determination as the eligibility determination coordinator. I like to look at the eligibility process as a process to determine all of the transportation options that are available to an individual, to an applicant, right? So I like to call myself maybe a transportation coordinator, right? I have information about transportation services and I'm sharing all of this information with applicants. One of the possible services that they can use, of course, is ADA paratransit service. So I'm still going through my process and evaluating, but when I communicate with my applicants, when I communicate this process, I want to communicate it to them in a way where they understand, like this is an opportunity for them to learn about all of the transportation options that are available to them, right? We can really do a great job of that in person if we have an in-person eligibility process. They can come in, we can give them bus routes, we can ask them where they live, maybe there's a local dial ride in their community. We can give them all the information that we have that pertains to them while we are also going through the eligibility process. So very important that we understand that this is a transportation decision, not medical decision, right? I think if we embrace that, we take that approach, and then we consider ourselves transportation advocates, not eligibility determination specialists. My role has expanded significantly. And now, if I am one of those people that maybe feels bad to deny service, well, now if I have collected all of the information from the community, all of the transportation options, I can feel that even if someone leaves today and they're not approved, they still have transportation available to them, whether it's the bus, and we have a travel training program they can participate in, a human service agency that serves their community, a non-ADA dollar ride. I was talking to a gentleman earlier, implemented like 5 new mobility on demand routes. There are all of these services out there. Let's consider ourselves, the bank of transportation options, right? And I'm sorry you didn't qualify for that loan, but I have this loan available to you, right? That's how we can look at this process. So we talk about making a determination, right? To provide a determination in writing, especially if we are denying service. We need to very clearly define for them why they were denied eligibility, right? We can have a process for recertification. The ADA tells us to recertify at reasonable intervals. In my experience, reasonable tends to fall 3 years from most agencies. I've heard of some agencies 2 years. I've heard of a few 5 years. I do not recommend a lifetime eligibility determined. Does anyone here have lifetime? I do not recommend that, because our operational reality today, or let's just say today our eligibility process is paper, okay? In a paper process, many more people qualify. We have less information. We don't have the opportunity to look at them, right? So we're losing that opportunity to evaluate them physically, which we can do. And so if you give them lifetime, let's just say in 5 years now your community has grown, you have a local tax that passed, you now have in-person eligibility. You just gave someone lifetime eligibility, right? I do not recommend that. Let me just say that. I won't comment further. Yes?
Is it okay to, because I've got some passengers that I've got that their eligibility is up in a year, and some of them 2 years?
Yeah.
Is that acceptable?
So some people you're giving 1 year and they have to recertify, and other people 2 years?
Yeah, like everybody new that's coming on, just
Right.
because things change,
Right.
people lie.
I mean, people can be misleading with information, yes. Yeah.
I know what their capabilities are.
Right. Right.
I know that things aren't going to change that quickly.
Right.
A new person that's coming on, let's just go a year, meet again.
Right. Well, I think we need to have a standardized approach, number one. I don't think two, we can randomly change the number of years for recertification because we want. We should go through a public participation process for that. So
It's like more work for you too, if you have to meet up with specific people one every year. And some people
yeah,
3 years.
I mean, it depends on staffing levels.
Right.
I don't know of agencies that have a 1 year re-eligibility as a standard. That doesn't seem reasonable. But I've heard of 2. The vast majority of agencies have 3. So, but I'm not going to say you're out of compliance. Maybe during your triennial review, if they have comment about it, they'll share that with you. But 1 year is probably not considered to be reasonable. But we have to make sure that we don't internalize this process. And what do I mean by that? So I was doing a training in Connecticut a few months ago, and I had, we kind of went off on a tangent and started talking about eligibility, and the transit manager, who also completed the eligibility at her agency, said something along the lines of, I just qualified an applicant unconditionally eligible for 3 years, and then this morning I saw her riding the bus. She lied to me, and I'm pissed. So I'm about to send her a denial letter. Anyone have thoughts about that?
You already approved her.
Right, we have a process. We follow a process. The information that we collect is the information that we use to make a determination. And so if we have information from outside, right, there's just not a lot we can do about that because we need to be equitable.
And your fixed route is public, just because they have eligibility.
I would have been happy to see her using the
Right?
bus, honestly.
Just because they have eligibility for paratransit doesn't mean they have to use it.
But this is what I mean about internalizing it. She took it as an offense that she was lied to. If we stand back and we look at it, yeah, I want that applicant riding the bus. Like, I think that's great. She didn't view it that way because of how she viewed the process, how she viewed her role, and she took offense to that. We need, again, depersonalize this, right? She needed to depersonalize it from her emotions, and we also need to find a way, when it's reasonable, to depersonalize it from the applicant's perspective as well, right? Because if you think about it, if we go through our process and we identify with the information provided that this person can ride the bus, okay? Yes, we have denied them eligibility on paratransit, but does that mean that they don't have a service to use? No, obviously it was overwhelmingly, in most cases, when we deny someone, that they can ride the bus. So they didn't leave that day or in 21 days when they get their letter without transportation service. They have transportation service, the bus. They might not want to ride it, but that's not really at issue here, right? Desire. So again, this is not a personal process. This is not a medical process. This is not, if you deny them, you've left them stranded at home and they can never actively participate in the community. That is not true, right? That is not true. And so...
Is it possible too that they could have somebody who qualifies for paratransit, but they also maybe used a fixed route?
Yes, we do have different eligibility categories, right? So we have unconditional, which means someone can ride paratransit for all of their trips. And then we have unconditional eligibility as well. Conditional, thank you very much. That person's listening. Conditional eligibility means that they are able to use the bus for some of their trips, but not all of their trips. And so we can identify them as conditional, and then we keep that data, we keep that information in our files, and when they call to make a reservation, right, we try to pull it up. So this is especially helpful for some people that have completed travel training. Let's say they completed travel training to and from work. So under a conditional approach, they would not get to ride paratransit to and from work because they've been travel trained for that. Or what about weather? I know here it snows, right, half the year, whatever. So maybe someone could qualify as conditionally eligible and they can use the service in the snow, but not in mild weather like this, right? Say they're in a wheelchair, they can't move in the snow, but in this kind of weather, they can board the bus and they can do whatever they need. So now there are other issues that I've seen here with accessibility, and it looks like it's street level boarding at a lot of the sidewalks. So that is a reason why someone in a wheelchair could qualify as unconditional in the system here in Park City, because there doesn't seem to be any accessibility, high levels of accessibility at least many of the bus stops that I saw. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. So we do, we have unconditional, they can ride for any reason, right? This would mean that it goes beyond difficult for them to use the service, to use fixed route. And then we have conditional, and there's so many different conditional, like let's say the nearest bus stop going west is accessible, but the bus stop going east is not, and they cannot get to it. Under that type of situation, under a conditional or trip-by-trip eligibility, we could provide them paratransit going east and not going west, because it is accessible for them to ride the bus going west. So then I had an agency do this, and then they said, now this rider is scheduling a trip to the Walmart on the other side of town to the east. And there's a Walmart 2 blocks away if they would just take the bus. And they were very upset by this. They felt like they had been duped, and they felt like this rider was stealing money and stealing rides and all. This is a person that has internalized the resources of the transit agency and the whole thing. And I told them, listen, we are origin to destination service in paratransit. It doesn't matter if they want to go to the furthest Walmart. If there was one across the street and it's a fully accessible crosswalk, it doesn't matter. So, and why doesn't it matter? I want to ingrain in all of you, whenever you're wondering whether you should make a big deal about something or not, I want you to ask yourselves, would this be a big deal on fixed route bus service? So this situation of going to the Walmart on the other side of town, if this person was taking the bus to the Walmart on the other side of town, would I be asking myself this question? The answer is no. We have equivalency requirements. And so it's a moot point, right? They can take service anywhere they want to go during our hours of operation. And that's called ADA paratransit, public transit services.
Have you ever had a conditional eligibility that's a minimum distance? Like they've got to be traveling a certain distance for their eligibility?
Well, we've had people that say we were able to document and identify that they could not walk 3 blocks and the bus stop was 4 blocks. So we qualified them. Is that what you mean?
I guess my question comes from, we have some passengers that have scheduled paratransit rides from their house to a building that's directly behind their house, or from one store in the same parking lot with another store. They go from this store to this store.
So, using my question, my self-regulating question, do I care if they get on the bus at this block and they take the bus a block and get off? That's my answer. So I can't make any issue of it.
In that circumstance, the bus, there's only one bus stop in that area. They would have to get into the bus stop and back to the building. I mean, what I'm saying is it's literally like you go from one end of the Walmart parking lot to the other end of the Walmart parking lot. There's only one bus stop. They wouldn't be riding the bus from the bus stop
well,
to the bus stop.
we provide origin to destination, address to address. So they can't give you the same origin address and the same destination address. So what they're asking for is an accommodation to be dropped off, perhaps, depending how they argue it, at a more accessible location, perhaps, or
But a minimum distance is not something you've ever heard of.
I've never heard of them. Like, we have to, in order for us to book this trip, it has to exceed 500 yards. No, never. I don't think we want to get into the business of that. But you do bring up an interesting, so let's talk about, so there is an ADA regulation that speaks to the issue of drop-off destinations, okay? We're going on a tangent, but I think this is an important one. And so, a mall, okay? I've worked for paratransit agencies where huge mall, huge property, and there were 3 pickup locations identified at this mall. This ADA regulation undermines a pickup location approach because it says that riders need to be able to identify their own pickup and drop-off locations. Okay, so specific to your issue, we have a Walmart parking lot, right? And there's one address for that whole parking lot. Is it reasonable, this is a question to all of you, is it reasonable for that rider, although you have identified the pickup location to be, say, right in front of, Walmarts often have 2 or even 3 entrances. Maybe you identified 1 entrance as the pickup location. So first question is it reasonable for them to want to get dropped off at one of the other 2 locations, or even another location on the same property? And I'm going to have to say yes, it is reasonable for them to make that request, because there are some people that can't walk 20, 30, 40 feet, right? Maybe they get dropped off and they walk 20 feet into the store and they get the scooter and then they do their shopping, right? They have very limited use of their legs. And so I think from the ADA's perspective, it would be reasonable for us to service multiple locations at a single property. Yes?
So I agree with that. My question is, but what if they could walk 3 blocks? Their eligibility was conditional based on, time of year, or maybe it's they can't walk over 3 blocks. Is that then a reasonable request? I mean, I'm not hung up on it. I really do want to understand.
No, I hear you. The ADA, and I love that we live in the world of splitting hairs. So we are splitting a hair here. So we went through eligibility. They shared that they could walk up to 300 feet. We gave them conditional eligibility for any instance where they have to walk more than 300 feet. And so if they want to be dropped off on this property at a location that is more than 300 feet away, then I guess
To your point,
we do that. No,
it doesn't matter. We should just do it.
well, yeah, but I mean, like if we pull up, right? And they say like, no, I want to be dropped off up there 20 feet in front. I mean, the ADA would probably, the ADA, like it's a person, would say, just do it, just shut up and do it, right? But we're thinking like, come on,
No,
But I hear what you're saying, so yeah.
You also have to be cognizant of what's safe for your vehicle and
Always.
really for your passenger. They may
Always.
want to go 20 feet,
Yes.
but if you pull 20 feet up, it may not be a safe place.
In our last session, we talked a lot about balancing ADA compliance, right, and the safe delivery of service with ensuring that our drivers, our operators, are always safe as well. And there was an example of door-to-door service, like, someone wants door-to-door service, yet the final 20 feet to their home is like completely unsafe or inaccessible. Had to drag them through grass and snow and all of that. And so we would say that that's not safe for the driver to do. So we have to create standards. And so everything that I'm sharing with you, yes, we should do this for the rider. It is always underlying. You should also be hearing as long as it's safe for us to do so, right? Whether it's safe for the driver to assist in these ways, that is keeping the vehicles in safe condition, right? I get a lot of questions about things like the rider wants us to pick them up. They live in the back of a mobile home park and the roads are one way, right? And it's very narrow. Do we have to provide service in there? And so I think the ADA guidance on service area is yes, we can provide service on private property as long as we are allowed to enter it and as long as it is safe for us to do that. And so if there are any, I have to throw in here when we are making determinations over safety that we are making these decisions using objective information, not subjective, right? So how do I know if my van can fit between those 2 trees? Everything else being equal and accessible. How do I know if my vehicle can fit there? How do I know if this person in their wheelchair is too heavy for my lift? I need objective evidence, and the only objective evidence is to try, right? So I'm not saying go scratch up your van and drive through there at 30 miles an hour, but you can start inching through, and if you start to hear scratching, maybe you stop. But what if you're in a one-way street and now you can't back up? And now you're going to scratch it all up? Like, these are the operational realities, Like, I know how tough it is out there, and you guys spend a lot of money, and you're very proud of your vehicles, and you don't want them to be damaged in these ways. Yet, we also have the responsibility to make an attempt to assist people with disabilities in various ways. And so, does that answer your question?
More than.
And then some?
Thank you.
Okay, great. That's what I like to hear. Over delivery. That's my goal. I want to over deliver. So, so specific to eligibility, it's not just about the condition of the individual, right? We were just talking about examples of the environment, right? People can qualify because of environmental barriers. They can be perfectly, they may be disabled, but they can walk long distances. They don't have issues with, their heart rate or everything else. Yet there's no curb cuts. I gave examples here. I noticed several bus stops where there's like a little house, and it's at street level, right? And so that might not be safe. What if we have intersections that don't have curb cuts? How's someone in a wheelchair supposed to safely cross? It's not reasonable for us to make them cross using the driveway to the gas station that's at the corner, you know what I mean? So if a rider here in Park City, we're going through eligibility determination, and they brought up the fact that, the bus stops in many parts of the community are not accessible, that probably would lead to them being unconditionally eligible, because they can't always control and know where there is an accessible bus stop and where there is not one. So that can be really tough. So what a lot of agencies will do, not a lot, agencies that are concerned about approving unconditionally applicants for curb cuts, for example, and passive travel for crossing streets, will do a bus stop accessibility evaluation project. They will evaluate for accessibility every single bus stop. And then if they're really serious about it, they will use that data. They will give that applicant conditional eligibility, and then every time they try to reserve a trip, they will check to see if the bus stops along that route are accessible or not. So that's a lot of work, but if we just do the math really quickly, right? We qualify someone as paratransit eligible. They ride 4 times a week. Let's just say our trips are $50, right? Each way, which, is not a bad price. I know we're trying to get it lower, but so let's say it's $50, that's $200 a week, that's $800 a month, that's $10,000 a year, and this person is eligible for the next 20 years. You do the math. We're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this person over their lifetime. So maybe they did qualify as unconditionally eligible, but this is really more of a message for those agencies that never deny anyone. Right? Like there's a price you're going to pay, a financial price in particular, over the life of that individual. And we don't often think about that, right? So environmental barriers, right? I mentioned, issues relating to weather, right? That could qualify someone, especially here, snow, sun, everything else in between. How do we deal with an applicant that maybe says that they have both a manual wheelchair and a power wheelchair, right? How do we determine which wheelchair they should bring? Say we did in-person eligibility. Does anyone here do in-person? No? Okay, so I won't go into much detail on in-person, but we're supposed to leave that choice up to the applicant. So we can't tell them, bring your power wheelchair. We know that provides the most mobility for them, but it really, our message to them should be, which wheelchair will you be using when you are traveling using transportation or public transportation, and then let them decide which one to use. So, right. What about the issue of changing conditions of the individual? This is another reason why why I don't like giving lifetime eligibility. I think even 5 years is too much for most applicants, to be honest. 3 years is good. People's conditions change. Now, normally they change for the worse, and that's why some agencies will give lifetime eligibility for people with certain types of disabilities. But, if we're just thinking outside the box, maybe there's going to be a cure for multiple sclerosis in 10 years. We don't know, right? Someone could have a manual wheelchair, and then they get a power wheelchair, right? Their condition has changed based on the power wheelchair. And so these are all the things we never know. Things can be unpredictable. And so we need to give ourselves at least room to allow for these changes, right? So even if we are not completing a in-person process, we can still have a very thorough paper application process, okay? And it really comes down to the content, the questions that we are asking, and what we are not asking. So let's start with the professional verification and the doctor. Wait, are we done at 12? 12:30. I'll have to say, damn, that's fast, okay. So let's talk about the professional verification, okay? And its importance in this process. The note from the doctor really can be as important as you want it to be. For many agencies that are unsure about making the wrong decision, they will send this, form, if you will, to a doctor, ask questions along the lines of, including the big question, do you think or can this person use fixed route services, right? In my experience, in the way doctors are, etc., I don't think they know whether this person can ride the bus or not, right? Yes?
I've had most of mine, it's almost like it's filling out a prescription.
Yes.
Somebody comes in and asks for it, sure.
It's like getting a parking placard, a disabled parking placard. Oh, you want one of these? Okay, for 6 months, will that work for you? They want people in and out. There's not a lot, and part of what is responsible for that is our application itself, the content of it. So I would never ask, can this person ride the bus, right? What will I ask? I want to ask questions that are reflective of the experience of riding the bus. Can this, are you aware of any issues with the applicant or your patient having problems walking up and down curbs? Walking distances up to 500 feet. Does this person have any issues, heart-related issues, right? These are the questions. So we're not asking about whether they can ride the bus, right? Can this person stay seated on a moving vehicle? Some people don't have core muscles and they fall over. Can this person stand on a moving vehicle, for up to 5 or 10 minutes or whatever it is? You see, the questions I'm asking are all descriptions, elements of riding the bus. The last thing I want to do if I'm putting together an application for your agency, I'm not going to ask them anything about riding the bus, because that's not information that is helpful to me. That's just their opinion. I want their opinion on how far they can walk, right? Are they unable to walk outside in temperatures above 80 degrees?
I think one of our questions asks how many blocks they can walk unassisted.
Mm-hmm. Does this person experience seizures? What happens when these are also questions that I'm going to be asking my applicant in the application. I'm not going to ask them necessarily if I only have a paper process, if I don't have any interview or telephone call with them, right? I'll ask them, what's the longest distance you can walk, right? Do you have problems walking up and down curbs or up and down stairs? And maybe at the very end, when's the last time you rode public transportation, right? After they've answered all those others. If I am doing, which I encourage, a telephone interview at a minimum, well, now I'm asking a bunch of open-ended questions, right? Oh, tell me about, a place you've gone in public recently. Oh, well, I went to Walmart. Oh, you did? How did you get there? Oh, I went, maybe they say on the bus. Oh, my daughter took me. Oh, okay, great. Were you able to walk around the store easily? Oh, yeah, I walk around the store pushing the cart, no problem. Do you see how just a 5 or 10 minute telephone discussion, asking these open-ended questions, we're not asking them about riding the bus at all. We're asking them about what it takes to ride the bus. We know Walmart's big. Oh yeah, I walked all around Walmart and I had no problem. That is very helpful information to me, right? Maybe at the very end, have you ever ridden the bus? Oh yeah, I did ride the bus, but I don't like riding it. Okay, well, liking riding the bus is not the same as being unable to. Well, what didn't you like about it? Well, I didn't like that there were all these people on board and it was loud. None of those reasons are reasons to qualify someone. So you see how a short experience, a short discussion, conversation can give us a world of information. And so, if we're talking about that individual that is scared of this process, that person that thinks this is a medical process, that thinks that denying someone would be the worst, terrible thing I could do to them, we don't feel so bad when we know that they can walk long distances. We don't feel so bad when we know that they've actually ridden the bus. They just don't want to anymore, right? it demystifies everything, and that's why I really push, when I talk about this particular subject, I really push the content of your application, right? That's really important, really helpful. So especially with doctors or, the therapists or social workers, whoever it is, they've never ridden the bus with this individual. So we want to collect opinions about the elements of using fixed route, right? We don't even really want opinions. We want like their comments, their direct experience, right? Not their opinion about it. Because when you ask a doctor or any of these other types of professionals, do you think this person can ride the bus? 99% they're going to say no, right? Because they don't really think a person with a disability should be on the bus, probably, right? Or they have their own baggage, and that leads to saying no, no, no. So, or literally they're filling it out, and the applicant's right there telling them, like, can you say this and can you say that? I can't ride the bus. That's not safe. What if something happens? What if something goes wrong? Welcome to public transit. So we have to be really careful. I know that's
You still have those same factors on a paratransit bus.
exactly right. It's a little more controlled because not just anyone can board, our van or our cutaway, but it is.
Crowded, it can still have other people. And
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So we have our process, right? We have to have an application. Maybe we have a professional verification, whether you do any in-person or telephone or not. We provide our opinion on their level of ridership. So maybe they get approved. What if they get denied? Or what if we give them conditional and they want unconditional? Well, they can appeal that process, right? And we need to make sure that this process is completely independent of our standard eligibility process. If I was involved in the initial eligibility determination, I can have no involvement in the appeal, right? So we go through, in essence, a whole nother eligibility process once again. And the rider, the applicant, I should say, the applicant can provide additional information, right? That's really important. They have 60 days to appeal after they receive their letter, the date of the letter. And it can be in person. With COVID, we do a lot of things via Zoom, etc. But if we are doing back to in person, they can provide additional information. This is interesting. Separation of functions, right? Again, making sure that we don't have staff overlapping. And then we, again, need to provide a written decision.
It actually states in the circular that no one in the transit office. It's not just the person that decides, it's within that office. Cannot have anything to do with the appeal process.
Was that in FTA's discussion of that subject? Probably was. Because it's awfully specific. I know it wasn't as specific.
There is one exception, and I think that was in maybe 37. That in
Yeah.
some rural
Yep.
agencies,
So, right,
not being able to find someone else
right.
that it could be, but I think you had to go through, another process. but-
Yeah, thank you. We see here the separation of functions is broken out, not a member of the same office, not in the organizational chain. A lot of agencies will actually hire, we'll call them consultants, medical consultants, if you will, that are experts in the primary disability of the applicant, right? Usually eligibility staff are maybe generalists. And so for the appeals process, it's not unusual for an agency to hire someone to manage that process or to make the determination. We can also have a panel, right? We can have a panel of, board members or other medical professionals, etc. So it's an interesting process, right? I know a lot of agencies fear the appeals process, but I actually like the appeals process because it helps us improve our eligibility process. Okay, someone appealed our determination. They won their appeal. Where can we learn? How can we adjust our process so that we don't miss the next applicant with this type of issue again, right? So I actually welcome appeals because I feel like it just helps us continue to polish our process, right? Maybe there was some really important piece of information that we didn't consider or we didn't attempt to collect, and the appeals process brought that to light. Let's roll that into our process, right? So, it's not, I don't think it's a reflection of staff doing a bad job when there's an appeal. I don't think that at all. It's just a second set of eyes, right? And depending on how you complete your appeals, it's an expert set of eyes. And we learn from experts, right? I mean, in our industry, that is what we do. From people that have knowledge greater than ours. And so if we have someone who is a medical professional in a particular way, I think that's really helpful, a really helpful experience to us, right? Or for us. Does anyone do any type of interview here? I know no one does in-person eligibility. Do you do telephone? You do. Okay, great. So I touched a little bit on in-person interviews or telephone interviews, but it really is a conversation, right? Describing the eligibility process. Thank you so much for completing the application. I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you. First, let me just share that this is the process in part to determine your eligibility for ADA paratransit services. We also have lots of information about other transportation services in our community. So I want you to think of me as a transportation advocate. And my job is to help get into your hands all of the information that can help you, right? So we're just starting to kind of frame the whole conversation. And, do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns before we get started? We start going through the application. See, when we are confirming what's on the application, this is also how we maybe start to identify any cognitive issues, right? Oh, okay, I see here that your address is, it's a little hard for me to read. What's your address again? And if they can, boom, 19433, blah, 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 right? We're evaluating them. Okay, great. I see your birth date is here and there. You mentioned that you have difficulties walking at times. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Right? And we just start to grow. We start to learn, and we're taking good notes. And we're asking open-ended questions. And all of these questions are trying to identify whether they are capable of using the bus, right? And when they're not, right? Especially if we stumble upon something that says, I have a very difficult time standing for more than 5 minutes at a time. Oh, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Often buses are full. So do you think that it would be difficult for you to ride the bus if you had to stand? If all the seats were taken, right? And, if they share, I tried to do that last month and I fell. Like, we can't ignore that, right? If they tried to ride the bus and they fell, that's really important information, because if we were to deny them, right, I'm sure that would come back up in the appeals if they were to appeal. So we just help them understand, helping us understand the contents of the application, their responses, and it also starts to just develop a little bit of trust, right? I'm a transportation advocate, right? I'm not a judge. I'm going to provide you information for lots of different services, including our service if you happen to qualify for it. Did you know we have travel training? Does anyone here offer travel training services? The eligibility determination process is a great way to find people for travel training, right? But we have to be really careful because we can't, the ADA does say that we can maybe give someone conditional eligibility if they are going through travel training, and then maybe we reevaluate them after.
Temporary eligibility?
I think some agencies do temporary, but
You cannot require it.
Yeah, no, you can never require travel training, but it could definitely help improve their skills and use of public transit services. And so there's just lots of different little tools that we can use, right? That's why especially the in-person process can be very helpful, but even the conversation with them, right? We're trying to build a relationship during this conversation, right? I mentioned mobility advocate, transportation advocate. Things we want to avoid, repeating the same questions over and over until we get the answer we want. That's no good, of course. Interrupting them before they apply, like if we've heard what we want and then we cut them off. Oh yeah, I used to ride the bus a lot. Oh, okay, great. Well, what about, right? And then we note down, that's sort of dishonest. Acting smug or shocked. Oh, what do you mean you can't ride the bus? You look like you're fine, right? Things like that are a little disrespectful, a little leading. And, even using judgments. It's hard for me to believe that you can't ride the bus, You seem like you said that you can walk long distances. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to ride the bus. We can't have a destination already in mind when we start this process. The destination is determined by the information that we collect. If you don't like the destinations that you're getting to, meaning, unlimited, unconditional determinations. If you don't like that destination, my advice to you is change your process, right? Change your process, change your frame of mind, change your perspective of this process. And when you do that, and if you do it well and you do it right, you will have a different destination, right? You will probably have a higher rate of denial, etc. And so, not to say we are trying to deny people, but we're not. We're just trying to follow the ADA guidelines, which is to have a strict process to ensure that only those people that qualify use paratransit services. That's what the ADA tells us to do. Just doing what the ADA wants me to do, right? Very important. Yeah. I think using notes is very interesting, and especially how we close out our interview, right? Our conversation, if you will. Right? Begin with an announcement. Okay, well, I think I have the information that I need, so I'd like to summarize that for you if I can. Right? Until recently, you were very active and you volunteered, but 6 months ago, you became increasingly tired. You shared that while going on walks, you've fallen a number of times in the last few months. Right? We sort of repeat to them the information that we've collected. And, does all of that seem accurate? Is there anything else you would like to share? And then we roll into our closing and let them know what our next steps. Right, okay, well, I have the information that I need. We will be considering this information and making a determination. You'll be notified within 21 days if you are eligible for paratransit or not. In the meantime, I'd really like to share with you some additional information, some other services that are available in your community. And we just go through our process, right? And try to educate, try to inform. So that's really important. We have a couple more minutes. Let's go through a couple examples of maybe some challenging scenarios. A woman with paraplegia who uses a wheelchair reports that she has been hassled by youths in her neighborhood, and she fears for her safety and has requested paratransit service. Is neighborhood safety a reason to qualify someone for paratransit? And the answer is no. Safety in her neighborhood has nothing to do with her ability to ride the bus. I mean, she could be using curb-to-curb paratransit service, and she's still going to be waiting outside, right? So fear of XYZ, that is not reason to qualify someone. A Chicago man with cardiac disease is described in his application by the doctor as being at special risk when exercising in hot weather. And for the trip requested, the bus stops are nearby, but the current summer weather is severe. So I like to really focus in on certain terms to help me start to identify maybe the direction I'm going to go in here, how I'm going to respond, right? at special risk when exercising. Does that mean?
At risk when they exercise.
Well, so is walking to the bus stop exercise? Right? I mean, that's kind of an undefined issue for us. So I would say here, we probably need more information, right? What does exercising mean? That's where those extra questions are of, can this person walk up to 300 feet safely, right? I mean, when we talk about exercise, are we really talking about walking at a regular pace? Are we talking about fast walking, running? I mean, what are we talking about with exercise, right? So some of these terms can be very can indicate we need more information, we need clarification. So that's an interesting one. On occasion, a woman with a mobility impairment uses a walker, has made the trip to the bus stop to get to the doctor's office. The 5-block walk to the bus stop takes her more than half an hour. She just qualified for paratransit, however, and seeks to make the trip to the doctor using that service instead. So, is it reasonable, right? We talk about reasonable effort. Is it reasonable to walk 5 blocks in 30 minutes? Right? I mean, I would like more information here. Tell me about that 5-block walk. Oh, well, I have to sit down regularly because I lose my breath and da-da-da-da-da-da. Now it's sounding like with some additional information that maybe this person would have some unreasonable difficulties using fixed route, right? So again, more information. So these examples I think are really helpful because we might see kind of this general comment or description from the applicant, from the doctor, because we're not asking questions that are specific enough, right? And so that's really the importance of the application process. And so, of course we know that paratransit is a civil right and that we're not supposed to discriminate against people with disabilities. And that includes in the eligibility process, right? If we are denying people unreasonably and unfairly, if we're approving some and denying others and they have very similar issues, right? We might have problems there with discrimination. The ADA tells us we have to have an eligibility process. Doesn't tell us whether it's only paper, medical verification, telephone, in person. We create the process that we think is best for our community and really best for the outcomes that we want. If we want to make sure that only those people using paratransit that need it, we have a more strict process. If we're really not worried about it, maybe it's an open process that everyone qualifies for, right? We need to remember that eligibility process is not a diagnosis of disability. It is not a medical process. It is a transportation process, right? And of course we know that our eligibility determination can be appealed and they can go through that process as well. And so, normally this is like a 4-hour training and I tried to be as helpful and informative as I could to all of you in the hour plus that we had, but I'd love to answer any other questions that you might have regarding ADA paratransit eligibility. Anyone? I do have the full eligibility webinar coming up in October, as well as other webinars, ADA compliance, policies and procedures, bus stop accessibility, that's a good one, even some mobility management stuff as well. So, all right, well, if no one has any questions, thank you all for your time and attention. I hope you all have my business card. If I can help with anything, please feel free to call, email, whatever I can do to assist your agencies. Thank you very much.